All right, so welcome everyone. I'm Jeremy Silvera. I'm the chairperson of the Occupational Therapy Department here. And tonight, the Center for Interprofessional Education and Collaboration, along with the Center for Civic Engagement here at Salem, is sponsoring this important event, which is going to give us the opportunity to discuss the legislation H180 banning aversive therapies and kind of all of the additional complex issues that are associated with this legislation. We are really, really fortunate tonight to have Senator Joan Lovely with us and Mara Sullivan, the Director of the Government Affairs for the ARC of Massachusetts, as our guest speakers. I also wanted to let our guest speakers know a little bit about who's in the audience tonight. So we have students and faculty from nursing, occupational therapy, social work, and special education with us tonight. And in addition to hearing about the legislation, the students are also going to learn a little bit about each other, from each other and with each other, which is what kind of interprofessional education is all about. And by doing that, hopefully they'll learn about each other's roles, values, and ethics. And we hope by being able to teach them not in silos, but together while they're here in their programs, that they'll learn to collaborate, work better in team environments, more effectively communicate, and really provide effective patient and population-centered care. And we know that from the research, interprofessional teams really enhance the quality of care that patients get, and it reduces medical errors, and overall can just make the process for clients and caregivers more centered on their needs. And so although the professions here tonight differ in the treatment and interventions that they provide, their code of ethics are very similar. So all of them share altruism, equality, autonomy, justice, dignity, and truth in their core values. And I think the legislation that we're going to be talking about tonight really relates to justice, autonomy, and dignity for the clients and the caregivers that these students will serve. So hopefully by participating tonight, I hope the students will leave with information about the legislation, about advocacy strategies, so that they can affect change and better support their clients and family needs. And to talk a little bit about the bill's history and tell us what the bill is exactly about, please help me welcome Mara Sullivan, the Government Affairs Officer for the ARC.
Oh, thank you so much, Jeremy. I'm really happy to be here, and I loved that introduction. It's really motivating and exciting to know that all the students are interested in this and interested in learning a little bit more about advocacy. As you mentioned, I'm the Director of Government Affairs and Health Policy for the ARC, and the ARC is the leading advocacy organization for individuals with autism and intellectual and developmental disabilities. And you'll hear me say IDD for short, because that's a long term. And I'm just really so happy to be here and to be here with one of the most inspiring champions in the Senate for our disability community, Senator Lovely. She actually files many of our top priority bills, and we work with her office very, very closely. She's been our legislator of the year, and we're just so grateful. So, Jeremy, do you want me to just jump into my slides now?
Sure, that would be great. Let me make sure that you can share.
I can. I'm already there.
Great. Yeah.
Quick as can be. Here we go. I don't know why it's okay, so I already did my intro, but I also just wanted to mention quickly that I am also a parent of three, and my two youngest sons, who are actually young adults now, they have profound autism. My son, who's 22, is pretty significantly affected in terms of he's not verbal, and he has a lot of very challenging behavior. So this advocacy journey is deeply personal as well as professional for me. So tonight I just wanted to give you a little bit of an intro to the ARC of Mass, because I would love it if people stayed connected after tonight regarding this legislation, but also connected to us to learn more about advocacy in general and to look at all of our legislative priorities and to see if there are other bills that really call to you and maybe will be important to you in your careers. We'll talk a little bit about the legislation, the history, and the advocacy efforts of the ARC of Massachusetts and the ARC of the United States. And I'm also going to give you an action alert that gives you a really easy access to connect with your representatives, state reps, and senators around this bill and to ask them to become what we call co-sponsors or to really help support the bill and help it pass favorably through the legislature. And then I'm going to turn it over to Senator Lovely. And then I'm back after Senator Lovely to kind of talk a little bit more about the opposition and what's, been getting us stuck for decades around this bill. So sound okay? All right. And interrupt me if anything comes in the chat, Jeremy. And I just wanted to share a little bit about the ARC. We're at our 70th year of advocacy this year, and our mission is to really enhance the lives of people with IDD. And we do this through advocacy, through, for community supports and that foster social inclusion and self-determination and equity. Well, obviously, contingent skin shock, which is what we're talking about here tonight, that does not match with our mission at all. And so we are very dedicated to doing all we can to pass this legislation and really stop this practice here in Massachusetts, which would actually stop it across the world. So our goal is really to amplify the voice of our community. And we do that through legislation. And we do that, through connecting you to your legislators. So we call it empowerment. We really want to teach people how to build those good relationships with their representatives and senators so that their voice can be heard and be a powerful one. So just quickly, in brief, the bill H-180 that Jeremy mentioned will prohibit the use of procedures which cause physical pain or deny reasonable human existence to persons with disabilities. You may have heard the campaign, Stop the Shock. I think that hashtag really sums up the bill. And so we'll talk much more in depth about the bill, and Senator Lovely will as well. But I also just wanted to share that this is a picture of my son, who is 22. This picture is a little bit younger. And like I said, he has really challenging behaviors, including aggression and self-injurious behavior. And he also has a lot of complex medical conditions. So throughout his life, it's really been our job and my mission to find out, what causes those behaviors. Is it pain? What are his behaviors communicating? And I've been able to rely on Neil's medical team to help and a really strong education team. And, the system has been there to support my son. The system hasn't been there for all families here in Massachusetts. So we'll talk more about that. But Neil is definitely my inspiration for a lot of this advocacy work, and especially for this bill. So the bill was filed by a representative named Danielle Gregoire. And really, this is just an excerpt from the language of the bill. And what we are really focused on here is stopping the electric shock for the purpose of changing the behavior of a person. I hope people understand that, this issue is so complex, like Jeremy said, but what we really need to get to is one place, and that's the Judge Rottenberg Center. And it is a day in residential school for children and adults. It's been operating since the 70s using electric shock, or they call it contingent skin shock, through a graduated electronic decelerator, or GED device. You might have seen that picture on my last slide there, and the devices have changed over the years. I think there was a time where people maybe wore them on their leg like that, but now the devices are, I think, typically in like a fanny pack or a backpack. But if you were around, you were all pretty young, but in 2012, a video surfaced of a student named Andre McCollins, and the video showed him being shocked 30 times while he was strapped down. And obviously this was a court case that actually ended in a settlement, and the school continued. So if you are brave and you want to Google that, you'll be able to see exactly the video. It's out there in Google search. So this school, Judge Rottenberg Center, or JRC, accepts those individuals with the most severe problem behavior. And typically those individuals have been denied by many other schools, many other facilities. They've been somewhat given up on by their healthcare providers, and the school has a very, very low denial rate. They accept everyone. So that's the Judge Rottenberg Center. And so here at the ARC, we have prioritized this legislation year after year, really since the 80s, the late 80s. The school's been around since the 70s, but they started introducing the device in the 80s. And this picture is actually the Committee on Children, Families, and Persons with Disabilities from a couple of years back before the pandemic. They typically every year hold a hearing where they will invite the public to come and provide testimony, either in support or against the bill. And basically that's how the hearing goes. It's split pretty much in half with families and policy folks and advocates and lawyers and professionals, and the committee hears from all angles. So that's what's been going on kind of on a state level. And then federally, in 2020, the FDA actually announced that they would finally ban the use of electric shock. However, in 2021, they reversed that through the U.S. Court of Appeals. And really, they did that because they said that the FDA did not have really the authority to ban a device for a particular intended use. So in 2020, they had banned it for use on self-injurious behavior and aggression. And they found that they really did not have the authority to do that in 2021. So more complicated than you can imagine. But this is, where the ARC is right now is we're getting ready for hearings, which is coming up in the fall. We don't have an exact date, but it will probably be in September or October. And we want to get more legislative support and more advocacy going for this bill. So, so we have an action alert, which I'll pop into the chat for you all. And then, hopefully some of you might be interested in providing testimony, connecting further with your rep and senator on this, and reaching out to me at the ARC for more information or any support you might need around continuing to help with this bill. But I'll stop here, and then we'll pick back up. And I'll put that in the chat. So I don't know if I want to turn it over to Senator Lovely now.
Okay. Senator Lovely, we're going to turn it over to you.
Okay, great. All right, thank you. Maura, thank you. That was just tremendous how you've explained this bill and why we are where we are today. I will tell you that I also have a personal story about why this is such important policy to me and why I have championed this since I entered the Senate 11 years ago. My predecessor Majority Leader Fred Berry, Senator Fred Berry was a senator for 30 years in the Senate, and he had a physical disability. And so he made this his life mission to support anybody with IDD or physical disability so that they could be the best they could be. And so I knew when I entered the Senate, I also wanted to continue to do this work in his honor and to continue to be able to help people. And then I also have two nephews, David and Matthew, my sister's son and my brother's son, who are now 35 and 33. Both are nonverbal with aggressions. And I have seen and witnessed firsthand how their families struggled with supports, with the right supports through schooling and, into adulthood. And I knew that I wanted to also be able to enhance all the supports that we can put in place for this very special population. So it's a top priority for me. I also had the amazing good fortune to chair the Children and Families and Persons with Disabilities Joint Committee, 2 terms. One term, I was the chair. The second term, I was the vice chair, but the chair had left for another opportunity. So I stepped in and closed out that session with the wonderful chair on the House side, Kay Khan. And so really we were able to move the needle on that, but I've stayed in this even though I'm no longer on that committee. So as Maura had explained, there was an appeal overturning the FDA ban on aversive technology used at the Judge Rottenberg Center. And when that appeal happened and the FDA ban was overturned, our phones started to ring. We heard from hundreds of constituents asking to support this bill. And so we heard from family members with IDD. We heard from so many constituents. And when Maura was speaking, my emails pop up in the corner, and one came in from a constituent right in Beverly to please support the bill. So we stay on top of all communications that come into our office, so we know what the district is asking. And so this is a treatment that should never be used on anyone. Can you imagine being strapped down on a table? You can't move, and you're going to be administered electric shock treatment maybe once, maybe 30 times, like Andre McCollins. Can you imagine? And you don't know when the next one's coming. And that is supposed to fix your behavior? I would think it would be quite the opposite. And we have seen it quite the opposite. I just met today with 2 advocates. Just this afternoon, I have office hours, virtual office hours every Monday afternoon from 4 to 5. So anybody who would like to meet with us, we meet every Monday, 4 to 5. And we can provide that Zoom information. So these 2 advocates were asking for support of this bill. And one of them, her niece actually died in a treatment facility, not the Rottenberg Center, but because she was, and it wasn't from electric shock, but it was from neglect for her treatment. And so I actually read the report that she had sent, and it was shocking. And I guess I use that word in both ways, but it was just unbelievable to me that these that the people that have died as a result of using other types of aversive therapies, including shock therapy. So we are driven to get this bill passed, and working with the ARC, which is just an incredibly strong organization. I feel confident that we will get that done. So let me explain the legislative process. The bill was referred to the Joint Committee on Children, Families, and Persons with Disabilities. That Joint Committee is chaired by Senator Robin Kennedy and Representative Jay Livingstone. And no hearing has been scheduled yet, but we are anticipating a hearing in September. So this is very timely to be able to advocate and have people testify. You may know that all bills receive a public hearing. So we filed over 6,000 bills every session. A session is 2 years, and every single bill is heard. And why? Because the public needs to weigh in. We need to hear from the public to hear how they feel about a bill in opposition or in support. And it's important for us, you know, as committee members, I'm not on this committee, but to hear from all perspectives, to get input from everyone across the Commonwealth. Now, the good news is, if there is any silver lining to COVID, it's that we have hybrid hearings now. So we're much more accessible, and we've seen participation just skyrocket. So people don't have to come into Boston, find a place to park, come into the State House. If you're busy with schoolwork, a job, a family, you can actually come right in on Teams or Zoom, and we can hear your testimony. If you want to testify in person, you don't have to. You can actually send testimony, written testimony. We can take it by email. Every piece of testimony is reviewed by the Joint Committee. So everyone's thoughts matter. If you don't want your thoughts public and you want to send in written testimony, let the committee know, and they will not make that public. Some people don't want to be known if they've had a particularly difficult issue with whatever the bill issue might be. So after the hearing, the committee then will review the bill, all the testimony, and decide what the next steps are for the bill. And there are, the bill can get a favorable, which is an ought to pass. It can get an unfavorable, which is ought not to pass, or the bill could be sent to study. If the bill is sent to study on the Senate side, if it's a Senate bill and it comes back to the Senate, we can revive that bill and continue to work on it. This is a House bill, so it would go to the House. And every bill does need to be heard by what we call Joint Rule 10 Day, which is the first Wednesday in February of our second year. And so all over 6,000 bills have to be heard by that day. If they don't get heard, they just get an extension, but those extensions are hard to come by. So we work very hard to be able to make sure all bills are heard. This bill has a funding impact. So it would be referred for, once it gets a, let's say it gets an ought to pass out of Ways and Means, out of the Joint Committee on Children, Families, and Persons with Disabilities, it would refer to the Committee on Ways and Means, where it would be further evaluated. And then we would work with the Ways and Means chairs and the committee and leadership, the Senate President, the Speaker, to move this bill to the floor. If this were not a funding impact bill, in the Senate side, it would come to rules, which I am the chair of rules on the Senate side. So then we would contemplate the bill, but this is, we'll have a funding impact. So it would go to Ways and Means. From there, continuing with the legislative process, the bills can move on to the floor based on the priorities, again, of members and leadership. And the secondary committee, like Ways and Means, or maybe it had to go to healthcare finance. Any committee of jurisdiction would have to review the bill before it gets to the floor for a vote. And now, as these bills are reviewed, it's not just the committee on Ways and Means that would review the bill. We also then continue to solicit comments from all stakeholders, including the relevant state agencies. We need to hear from everybody who this bill may touch to be able to have the appropriate communications, input, and because we want to make sure this bill does exactly what it's supposed to do. And so now let's say it goes to the floor. It would go to the House floor first, since it's a House bill. For engrossment, it would be engrossed. That's like a first passage. It would come to the Senate to be engrossed. It would go back to the House to be enacted. It would come back to the Senate to be enacted, and then it would go to the governor's desk for the governor to contemplate and hopefully support and sign, and not be sent back with a veto. So how can all of you, help to move a bill to the governor's desk? Reach out to your legislators, your senators, your representatives, We can help with that, whichever community you live in, where you register to vote. Those are your senators and reps. You might have one senator, you might have two, you might have several reps, depending on the size of your community, and ask for their support and co-sponsor the bill. Meet with your legislators to tell them why the bill is important to you. Share your personal stories if you feel comfortable doing so. I can't tell you how impactful it is when we hear from our constituents. It really matters that we hear from you. Just like this afternoon when I met the two advocates regarding this bill. One's a constituent. She lives in Beverly. And it really helped me to hear what happened to her niece and why now she's advocating for this bill because of what happened in her personal life with her niece. So we need to hear from you. The more people we hear from, the better. In my office, we record all of, when someone calls in or emails, that goes into a database that is not shared with anyone. That is a private database. That's not information that we would share publicly. It just helps us kind of keep a tally of where people's thoughts are. And we also want to make sure that you know when the hearing is, so we can notify you. We have an automated system. It works really well. And so that's what we do with that as well. And so I just want to say thank you to Maura for sharing her story about her son, Neil, and why this is so important to her, why it's so important to ARC, and why it's so important to us as legislators. Again, I'm shocked that the ban was overturned in appeal. I just can't understand why electric shock therapy in particular, when you're physically or emotionally harming someone, how that's even remotely a good thing. We probably, and I want to turn this back to Maura because she's going to talk about the opposition and why there's opposition to this. You wouldn't think there would be, but there is. So my message to you would be, please contact us. Let us know how you feel about this. Let us know that you want to support it. And your advocacy is really how we make good law and good policy. So we need to hear from you. I can't stress it enough. And thank you for the opportunity to be here. And I'll be here for questions later. And I'll turn it back to Maura. So thank you.
Thank you, Senator. That was great.
Thanks, Senator. Yeah, I mean, you mentioned, who would oppose this bill, and truly JRC and the parent advocates have been getting the job done every year. They come, they tell their stories, and they make an impact. So it's really important that the people who really understand that this abusive procedure needs to end also come and are heard even stronger. So let me just share one more time. Let's see, where am I? Right here. A little bit. Can you see that? Can you see my slide? Okay. Yeah. Whoops, I went too far. So yeah, so JRC has pretty much always had very, very strong legal teams that can fight this on many, many levels. But I will say, and they come and they testify and they give a lot of data, a lot of data. But I think what really is most impactful are the families that have their loved ones here and tell the stories of how JRC has saved their loved one from, really extreme self-injurious behavior, homicidal behavior, suicidal behavior. And they talk about the transformation to, a son or a daughter who can now come home and watch a movie on the couch and not have these, immensely challenging and dangerous behaviors. So that's sort of what the committee faces, is hearing that there have been no other options. Now, when I say the system has failed, it's like a multi-layer system that is failing these individuals who have the most severe behavior. So I talked about my son and how his medical team has been so dedicated and so involved from the beginning. You know, many of these families and individuals haven't had that kind of medical oversight. Their doctors have given up. And again, the school systems haven't provided the kind of support throughout their education process. So, you know, they have this little blurb on JRC's website about Jane and her problem behavior. And these are the kind of stories that they come with to hearing, that they, you know, write to their legislators. And I think it's, you know, really challenging for their state reps and senators to hear these stories and not have another option, you know, for these families, not to be able to say, oh, yes, but they can go here and they, you know, can get the support they need here, because many of these individuals, again, have been either kicked out or denied acceptance to other so-called, you know, expert care facilities here in Massachusetts. So I just, you know, I'll stop there just to take some questions, because I'm sure y'all feel like that's pretty, it's a lot of information and it's a little challenging to digest it all. But and then also just, you know, to bring it back to Senator Lovely too, from your perspective, you know, being a chair on the committee and a vice chair, you know, how you balance all of that.
So if people have questions, you can put them in the chat, or you can kind of just unmute and ask your question. I think we're a small enough group that we could probably handle that, but also feel free to put it in the chat.
I have a question for Senator Lovely and Maura. Just given the unfortunate perennial nature of your attempts to get this passed, and I hear what you have said, Maura, about the families that are desperate, being very strong voices in opposition. What do you think will turn the tide? What do you think will help? Not that any of us want these families to be under any more burden than they have already gone through, but what do you think will turn the tide in the direction where it will get passed?
So I'll weigh in here. We really do need to hear from our constituents. It's really important, especially those who may have a family member or know of an individual with IDD, with autism, who may have experienced some of these types of therapies, and what was that outcome? To me, I look at this as torture. I can't imagine, again, someone being strapped down and shocked. And that's not a pleasant experience. I can assure you. I have not seen it personally, but I've seen videos and I've heard stories where this is used for, again, behavior change. It's used for behavior change. To me, it's torture. And I just can't imagine that this is even allowed. It just is unimaginable to me. But hearing from our constituents is probably the strongest advocacy that you can do. We need to hear from people. If this is an outcry, we're going to pay attention. And so that's why, having all of you here tonight, talk to your friends, your family, your peers, about this. Hey, are you aware about electric shock therapy and that this actually still happens? And you know what? There's a bill at the State House that we can do something about it and stop it. Strongest thing you could possibly do.
I totally agree, Senator Lovely, because often the phenomena that happens is it's just policy people who show up to do the advocacy. And, you know, that's great because, you know, we're strong and we're really motivated too. But I think the legislature needs to hear from their constituents, right? That's going to be key. And then, like you said, raising awareness. There's lots of people I tell about this bill and they say, what? This is not something from the 1930s. This is still happening. So the awareness isn't even out there. So, you know, spreading the word, that's why, you know, this wonderful campaign that really caught fire on Twitter with, you know, the hashtag Stop the Shock, brought, you know, people from literally across the world to the Massachusetts legislature, writing them and saying, you know, this is barbaric. And so, yeah, I totally agree, Senator Lovely. This is going to be about a movement that just doesn't end and really just forces the bill through. The other thing that I think is important is that the administration gets the message as well. And, you know, we have a new governor. She is very, very focused on equity. And I think that this is a really good time for us to push in terms of disability equity. And, you know, these patients or individuals with IDD that can't communicate the pain of this, can't communicate, they don't understand why they're even necessarily getting this shock. It causes, you know, psychological harm, PTSD, long-term anxiety, depression, suicidal thoughts. We know this type of therapy causes this kind of harm. So I think getting the message out there, I think we need to have more money put into these families early on. I think when the Department of Developmental Disabilities doesn't move on these children who really need the support early on, these are some of the effects we're seeing. So more supports for families, more supports for schools that are trying to serve these really challenging individuals, getting to them earlier, more intensive and earlier intervention services, identifying these individuals early on and giving them the staffing they need. I think that, you know, schools that we talk about that are expert in providing behavioral supports, you know, they don't have the money to put, you know, 3 or 4 or 5 staff on someone to keep them safe. So that's why they don't accept these kids. And, you know, maybe if we had, you know, a specific pool of money that was designated for individuals that have severe challenging behavior, you know, that would be a way to sort of prevent the need, right? And the more we prevent the need, the more we, you know, don't fill up that school. So those are some of the things that we're going to be talking about to the new administration, and obviously continuing to advocate with the legislature. But again, just, you know, you guys getting connected will be great.
You know,
Sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry, Senator. So I was just responding to Kathleen's, like what's gonna change. And, you know, being a mother of a IDD child, you know, can you just imagine, and believe me, I agree with this, with the legislation, but can you put yourself in those families' place when they are at their end? There's no hope for some of these families. So I agree with you, Mara. We need the legislation to understand we need more services, mental health services. We need to put our money in preventative kinds of things, in identifying kids who need the services earlier, because you see where some of those families are. You've been there. We've all been there that have kids we're sort of don't know which way to go. There's nothing else for us to do. What, you know what I mean? I can just, my heart is bleeding thinking about it, Also, I will tell you, I'm a nurse and I worked in a recovery room, and this was in the late 80s. We did electric shock, and not on children with behavioral issues, but on patients. And it is horrific. It's horrific. Yes, I'll tell you that, right? Nightmares you'd have for years. They did it back then for severe depression, ideations of, suicidal ideations, things like that. Is just incredible. But I agree with you. Nothing that hurts should be done ever. That's not a treatment. So, but we do have to give those families hope somehow. With the legislature saying, we're going to put more money into something to support or whatever, change our system somehow.
I just wanted to add one thing really quickly, if I could. My sister's son, Matthew, nonverbal at 33, been in a group home for about 5 years now. That took a lot for her to relinquish that control. He's doing well, but aggressions and then microaggressions, and what could they do to really kind of change that behavior for him? Because as Maura said, there's a communication gap, a big communication gap. So you don't know, is there something, do you hurt somewhere? What's bothering you? And that individual can't communicate it. And the way they communicate it is through an aggression. So here's what I want to share is with my sister's son. She did some research and was able to, she goes over 3 times a day, she or her husband, to administer CBD oil to Matthew, because that's helped him, but it's not federally approved. And because the group home takes federal funds, the organization, they can't administer it. But we've seen a big difference for him just with the CBD oil at the right dosage. But again, so here we are. We need to work with our federal counterparts to be able to approve some of these, again, a medication that has really helped Matthew with his microaggressions. So, just for example, so we were working with Senators Markey and Warren and Congressman Moulton to, again, move the needle at the federal level, because we all have to work together. So anyways, didn't mean to interrupt, just wanted to share.
So I just wanted to say thank you very much, Senator Lovely and Maura. And I can't believe that this aversive treatment is still going on. And Carol, thank you very much for your story as well. It's very important to hear personal stories. I want to make sure that electroconvulsive therapy is not being confused with aversive treatment of children, because for people who are treatment resistant, who are severely suicidal, electroconvulsive therapy, ECT, is very effective in saving lives. And it's done much more humanely than it had been in the past, with muscle relaxants and just sufficient amounts of medication, a very short time that a person is anesthetized and has to have, ambu bag and so on for like 20 minutes. But our students have observed this, and I've worked really closely with Dr. Abrams, who really is a key person who does this. And there is a book about electroconvulsive therapy, actually by Kitty Dukakis, called Shock. So that's different than what we're talking about tonight. And I hope that people who are pro, aversive therapy aren't confusing what's happening to the children with what is going, the treatment for resistant depression. And that means that, people are usually hospitalized for several months and medications are tried. And then it is the treatment of last resort, the electroconvulsive therapy. But what we saw in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest is totally outdated. It's done much more humanely. So I just want to make sure that that's clarified. But I also was thinking, the CBD oil, why not be able to have that? And I hear the federal conflict going on. But I also wondered whether or not any medications have been tried. And I'm not for over medicating children, but I do understand, again, early enough in observing the behaviors, perhaps medication could be tried. And maybe it hasn't been. And I know that as a parent, I would be really leery about psychotropic medication, but on the other hand, in small amounts and carefully regulated and carefully monitored, that might also be an alternative. So, but I'm happy to write a letter to advocate to pass this legislation. So I will definitely do that.
Thank you. I just wanted to jump in there because when we were talking about the systems support, I mean, health community is a huge area that needs to come in here and support. But one of the things we hear at hearing is that these children and adults have been over medicated and that they are coming to JRC, barely with eyes open, and that so it's kind of works against the idea that JRC can get them off these meds somehow. But yeah, thank you so much for the point about electric convulsive therapy. People do, I think, get a little confused sometimes.
So I'm a person, I have autism. I wasn't diagnosed when I was a kid, but I did experience abusive negative reinforcement. As someone who I was verbal, but people couldn't understand me for a long time. I had a lot of speech therapy. So it's absolutely horrifying to me knowing what it's like to be someone who's in pain or who can't have their needs expressed and people not understanding. And I'm kind of wondering who's administering this? Is it untrained staff? Is it BCBAs? Like, how are they justifying this in the first place? Was it the old ABA research that was all based off pigeons from Skinner and they're just tying it in still? I just don't understand how it was ever even started and who's administering. I'm sorry if you mentioned that and I missed it.
I did not mention it before, and thank you so much for sharing. That's, just so personal and but so important. So the way that this shock works is that it actually has to be court approved. There's like a whole 10-step process where the guardian has to approve it. It goes through a human rights committee. It's peer reviewed, it's monitored, there's oversight. I mean, a lot of this has come along since, the 2012 exposure. And so I think with some of these processes in place, it makes it a safer way to administer this. But it is, still the same that it was, 20 years ago, which is, shock to change the behavior. So I don't know where it developed from. I don't know if someone else, on the line knows, but yeah, it certainly isn't used anywhere else in the country. So.
What did you say, Mara? It's not used anywhere else in the country?
No, nowhere else. Just in Massachusetts, just at the Judge Rottenberg Center.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. I know, it's very, very interesting. And, we do have a lot of out-of-state people as well that come in. We had quite a few from New York. New York was sending some of their more, challenging individuals. And they started to pull back a little bit as well. But it's really important, again, to just look at the population being served there and what we can do, and, to look at the intersectionality. Are there more people of color that are being subjected to this? There's still a lot more we can do as advocates.
Ian, do you have any more knowledge about this? This is so interesting.
So are you asking me?
Yeah, Ian.
So what I was going to say, no, I don't. And in fact, I mean, I just remember years ago, the Fernald School, I believe, used to administer this type of treatment quote. I'm just wondering whether or not we could lift some of the arguments from any of the other states that actually have banned this procedure, and use that in our letters.
Yeah, that's a good strategy. The ARC of the United States actually has, been involved in the national effort. And they have some really good scripts and some really good advocacy going on a national level. But again, this school has been the one kind of holding all of the power.
Mm-hmm.
Mari, can I ask you a little bit about, I know you said that this is a multi-layered complex issue, and you talked a little bit about staffing at these places needing to be better. But can you talk a little bit too about the education of our medical professionals and how they understand and treat children with autism and IDD? It's particularly because I know your experience with Neil and his doctors, and some who didn't understand what his pain was from, what his behaviors are from, and then some who were really good about it. And I know that there's legislation that's being prioritized through the ARC to kind of help with that. I didn't know if you wanted to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. Thank you. Yes, I would say that, there's always staffing issues in these facilities, in these schools. But right now, the workforce shortage crisis is so intense in our community that it really worries me that even the schools that typically do a good job supporting individuals like Neil are struggling now to support them. So what does that mean for those folks? So we really have to focus on the workforce and how we can build it up. And that's actually true too for the healthcare workforce. There is not enough doctors that are trained in autism and intellectual and developmental disabilities. We are definitely in a shortage of specialists who are even willing to treat our patients. And a lot of that stems out of just there is no requirement during their medical school education to learn about how to treat these patients. So they graduate feeling very unconfident, and most are unwilling to take on the patients. So families are left really struggling, trying to find expert care. And again, a lot of times they will find doctors who kind of look at the diagnosis and do what we call diagnostic overshadowing. Oh, that self-injury, that aggression, that's part of the autism. Let's medicate, so they may provide, psychotropic meds or really strong impulsivity control meds, but really the problem could possibly be pain. So we really need to mandate education in the medical schools and have continuing education for primary care and specialty care in our hospital providers. Such a huge, important piece. Yeah, there's a lot more bills we could talk about.
So I also wanted to raise the issue as far as applied behavioral analysis is what has been a very effective treatment for autism, as I understand it. And I'm sure some of you are much more, knowledgeable about this treatment. I know that our psychology department actually has courses in this now. And I don't know if it's a major or not, but I'm wondering if we actually could incorporate the idea of, well, if there is more staffing, if psychologists could be involved early on when children are younger. I mean, obviously, we're trying to do prevention here or early intervention. So I don't know if the role of the psychologist has been called into play, but that's something else that we might incorporate in advocating for this legislation, that there are treatments already for autistic children who can very much become violent and lose control and so on. And my understanding from the literature is that it's very, very effective. So I don't know whether or not psychologists would say, well, the behavior is so out of control that we really can't monitor it. But I'd be very surprised. I think that psychologists would go into these situations and try to figure out what is the stimulus and being able to address what the triggers are. I hope.
I just have to pop in and say, I'm not trying to debate anyone, but applied behavioral analysis is looked at by abuse by most of the adult autistic community. It's widely accepted by autistic adults that it's considered abuse now. And with the American Academy of Pediatrics, one of the big national medical associations just came out actually against it, which was huge. I was trying to find it on my phone, but I would highly suggest anyone read maybe Neuroclastic or any websites by autistic adults who've endured ABA, because it is abuse.
Thank you for that. I'm not familiar with that.
Yeah, thank you, Steen. I was also going to jump in and say, while there is a lot of data and evidence in support of ABA, I think that the evidence-based practice literature is emerging that children and families need options, and ABA is not the only option. And in the interest of our time together here in this interprofessional event, occupational therapy, social work, nursing, speech and language pathology also play a significant role in early intervention. And so I think that psychology is certainly absolutely a valuable discipline. I think that no one discipline can carry the day for the needs of children and families. And I think that we need to be really careful about it's harder to collaborate. It's harder to work together and find common ground. But in the interest of the long-term outcomes for adults with disabilities and their families, convenience cannot be the goal at hand. I think that really understanding the neurology of how multiple disciplines and multiple views of strengths and needs of children and families in early intervention settings can contribute to much more positive outcomes. And I think that we're still not doing a great job of documenting that. The ABA community is doing a great job of documenting that. I think that our interprofessional practice efforts here, led by Professor Silvera, are certainly promoting that we do a better job of that. So, is that a good segue, Jeremy?
That's a great segue.
Is it okay if I share my screen?
Absolutely.
All right.
So this is Professor Kathleen Schlin. She's a professor in the occupational therapy department, and she specializes really. Her focus of her rehab of her PhD has been social justice issues, and making sure that we are addressing social justice and occupational justice for our clients. So she's going to talk a little bit about occupational justice. And I'll let her go.
Thank you. So, like I just mentioned, this is a collaborative event between the Interprofessional Education Institute at Salem State and the Center for Civic Engagement, because that Venn diagram is so important. So I understand that we have many disciplines on the call, but one of the kind of goals of interprofessional education across the country is for us to learn about each other's discipline in a little bit more detail than just in the hallway when we're trying to care for clients. So this is our effort to kind of help people understand what occupational justice is and how we might consider it as a foundation for advocacy for situations exactly like H180. All right, so, just two quick learning objectives for our time on this topic is that you'll be able to define occupational justice and recognize its alignment with and unique variance from social justice. It's not an equal sign, they're different. Occupational justice and social justice are different. And I'm hoping that you'll be able to kind of think about and discuss occupational justice in relation to aversive therapies. So occupational justice has been described as a kind of justice that affirms the right to inclusive participation in everyday occupations for all persons in society, regardless of age, ability, gender, social class, or other differences. This picture on the bottom right is of a protest from the mid-60s from disability justice folks in New York City. And although you can't see her very well, one of the champions of disability justice, Judith Heumann, we just lost a couple of months ago, is one of my inspirations for continuing to try to champion disability justice and occupational justice for young children with disabilities and their families. Occupational justice includes access to and participation in. It's not just that they get to engage, but they have access, they have the choice of access to the full range of meaningful and enriching occupations afforded to everyone else, including opportunities for social inclusion and the resources to participate in occupations to satisfy personal, health, and societal needs. And I'm going to come back to that societal needs phrase in a little bit. So let's unpack it even a little bit more as described by Dutoit, Boning, and Vandermeer. And occupational justice can be kind of seen on a bit of a continuum. So you can see on the left side of this graph that occupational injustice is related to boredom and loneliness and helplessness. These three experiences, these three human experiences, when perpetuated, can lead to occupational injustice. And where these three things come from need to be addressed. But occupational justice is rooted in doing, in the feeling of belonging to a community, and in the feeling of becoming what you have the potential to become. So occupational justice ensures access, opportunities, and resources to do, be, belong, and become what the people have the potential to be, and the absence of avoidable harm. So, as Maura so eloquently said, if we're respecting children, we're not harming them. If we're creating opportunities for meaningful engagement for them, they may not be as frustrated enough to act out and be aggressive, right? If we can create mindfulness co-occupations in a socio-cultural context that has meaning for them, then they're going to be motivated intrinsically to do. But if we're forcing them to complete a worksheet because the curriculum says they have to, and they can't express their needs independently because of their neurology, then that might be eliciting some behaviors that are unexpected, but they're driven by that environment. They're not driven by the diagnosis. They're driven by the combination of the diagnosis in an environment that's not a match, that's not promoting occupational justice. So from a specifically occupational therapy lens, occupational therapists use the occupational therapy practice framework, domain and process. It's our 4th edition. And, this can, sometimes in class we refer to it as our Bible. And there are 9 occupations that occupational therapists focus on. And where does occupational justice fit in to our practice? It fits in contexts. The environmental factors and the personal factors that contribute to our clients being able to engage in these 9 activities. But it's not just context. Occupational justice is both an aspect of the context and also an outcome of our interventions. So when we wear these occupational justice lenses, we're always looking at outcomes. We're always looking at how can I create an environment that will afford this client access and engagement in meaningful occupations from this list of 9. So where does occupational justice and social justice, what's the Venn diagram there? So the occupation, one of those 9 occupations, ADLs, IADLs, health management, rest and sleep, education, work, play, leisure, social participation. So occupations and social justice, when social justice is being experienced, there is equitable distribution of resources, rights, responsibilities, and opportunity. When occupation is being experienced, everyday activities are accessible that promote health and wellness, bring meaning and purpose to our lives, meet needs and wants. And there are 9 very broad categories of occupation that could fulfill people. And so occupational justice, Wilcock and Townsend specifically, have documented that occupational justice is the intersection of social justice and occupation. In fact, the World Health Organization can also kind of be brought in to the conversation. And I wonder if this might also be something you might be interested in including in your letter to your legislators or anyone. But I heard you, Anne, you're such a creative thinker. I heard you saying, where can we pull from some things that are already existing? The World Health Organization identifies that health inequities arise from societal conditions in which people are born, grow, live, work, and age. And so social determinants of health, I was actually at a conference a couple of weeks ago, and there's a small subset of people in infant mental health who are now using the phrase social drivers of health as opposed to social determinants of health. And I loved it. I wanted to steal it immediately because determinants seems so, fate oriented, but driver means that we can change it. We can change the direction, right? So social drivers of health, like education access and quality, healthcare access and quality, neighborhoods, built environments, social and community contexts, and economic stability also contribute to whether social justice is accessible and whether occupation, and therefore that intersection, occupational justice, is accessible. You can see how all of these determinants of health can absolutely feed into this Venn diagram that we looked at, right? So I already went over that. I won't beat it again. There's no test. So I want to show you a clip just to kind of really get your brain thinking about how social justice and occupation, the intersection of the two, is really where occupational justice lives. I'm going to show you just not even 30 seconds of a clip from a documentary from Louis Theroux, produced by the BBC, called Extreme Love Autism. And it is a family who very generously allowed the BBC to film their child and in many different settings, their family, in their home, at school. And I want you to watch this clip thinking about the Venn diagram. All right, I'm going to stop it right there. Look at the environment. Look at the environment. I'm not here to criticize anybody in this clip, but I'm here to have us think about the intersection of occupation. Looks like school, looks like maybe some visual, perceptual, motor activity. Looks like there's not a lot of stimulus around, but what the message was breaks over. And so where is the occupational justice for this child in that setting, in that moment, that resulted in acting out? And how does that relate to our conversation about this bill and about aversive therapies, and how we can talk to our representatives about what could happen instead of aversive therapies? And then the other thing I'd like you to think about, if you can just kind of take a moment to think about a client or a family member or a neighbor or someone that you know who has struggled more than most with a disability, with achieving goals, and use these graphics of what occupations might be impacted and how social drivers of health may have not supported that child or that family in their efforts to manage behaviors, in their efforts to change behaviors, before getting to the extreme of thinking that aversive therapies was the only option. Use the graphic to reflect on the possible impact that broken systems of care and or these social determinants of health have had on whoever it is that you're thinking of. Kind of hold space in your mind for that person. And think, just like Maura said, the layers, and Senator Lovely said too, the layers that are contributing to this problem are just huge. But if we look at broken systems for kids and families and not just look at the behavior, then we can see where social justice, where occupational justice, social justice, and occupational engagement can find a place and make it work. So last slide, just another kind of lens to look at our dilemma about this bill. If we look at some contributors to why some families are feeling like aversive therapies are the only option, I just gave some examples. Think about a developmental stage where systems may have failed this child or these children and these families. Early childhood, toddlers, early intervention. Maura mentioned that many students at Judge Rotenberg are coming from New York. New York's early intervention system has been at the heart of debate for lacking the ability to meet needs for literally decades since I was in college. So is that a factor? Is social participation wherever the child is not a match for their capacities for occupational engagement? Is anybody supporting communication in the way that the child needs to communicate, not in the way that teachers or grandparents or parents want to communicate? Like I said earlier, convenience can't be at the root of decision-making. Outcomes, long-term outcomes needs to be at the root of our decision-making. And then what are the threats to access, opportunity, or resources? And Maura was singing my song when she was saying that limited funding for staffing and for intensive in-home interprofessional early intervention services and supports is problematic. And so weaving that into your conversations or your letters would be fantastic. So I'll just I'm not sure where we are with time. If we have opportunity to kind of engage in some discussion about other ways that we can kind of use an occupational justice lens to think about advocacy, I'm happy to hear thoughts.
Well, I just want to weigh in and say that was fascinating. This is not my area of expertise, so I learned something. So thank you so very much.
You are welcome.
And I'm going to bid you all adieu. I want to say thank you to the Barry IOP. Thank you to Samantha Giffen and Cynthia Lynch, to Dr. Silveria, to Maura from ARC, And to all of you, this has been really just a wonderful evening, sharing all this information. I hope that this was helpful on how to advocate for this particular bill. And just thank you for everything that you're doing to move the needle, to improve people's lives, and again, make them everything that they can be. So thank you. And I'm always here as a resource. Please don't hesitate to reach out, and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you so much.
Thank
We
you,
really
Senator.
appreciate it.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
See you soon.
So I'm going to jump in again to think about, you would think that there could be some technology, computer technology, that could somehow come as an interface between the caregivers and the person who's unable to express their feelings. And I mean, maybe it's just not there yet, but I mean, I know for stroke patients, they learn how to use eye movement. I mean, I know that they can't, we're talking about a totally different person and a totally different situation, but eye movement to be able to point to a way to be able to express. And I don't know whether or not, I mean, I don't know enough about certainly adults who are autistic and children, whether or not they could spell out and whether or not they can learn about expressing their feelings. I mean, I've seen some success stories with this. So I don't know. Do you think that there's anything that could be on the horizon that would involve technology?
I think that you're absolutely hitting the nail on the head in terms of what I said earlier, in terms of children need options, kids and families need options. And yes, there's a myriad of communication options. There's an entire discipline. Augmentative communication specialists can design high-tech and low-tech. Occupational therapists contribute to high-tech and low-tech communication options for kids. But though, like we said earlier, those services cost money, and those services require time. And I'm wondering if, maybe that is the direction that we should lean in, Maura.
This is a great conversation. Yes, I think technology has so far to come to support people with disabilities in general. Still, I think we just have to keep in mind the spectrum is very broad, and there are folks that will struggle to use augmentative communication as well. And those who can communicate verbally, who still are really struggle around communicating feelings. They're just more concrete communicators, and that gets challenged. So the spectrum is just so broad and so wide, but I do think technology and as you mentioned earlier, just choice for families and individuals. What works for one is not going to work for another. And I love the idea of the intensive collaboration early on.
And I also think access is an issue. So I know that first, finding an augmentative communication device that works for someone is hard and difficult, and getting staff trained and families trained and the child to be able to use it effectively, and then it breaks, or it gets thrown in a pond, or some of the things that I have, known to happen. And the price and the cost and the expense of those things make access for some so not available. And I think, Kathleen, what you were talking about with this being multi-layered is lots of times it is that access piece of it that's preventing some of the technology we already have, or some of the things that could be used instead of what's being used. Samantha, I know that you have a great presentation on advocacy, and I don't want to run out of time before you're able to do your presentation. I would like to be able to continue the conversation maybe after you go, and we can talk about, how we can kind of incorporate everything that we've just been talking about with our advocacy efforts. Would you like to share now?
Yes, yeah, that sounds good. Let me just share my screen now. Cool. So hi, everyone. My name is Samantha Giffen. I'm currently the Assistant Director for our Frederick E. Berry Institute of Politics. We are an office that works very closely with the Center for Civic Engagement, but focus a lot more on political engagement, including legislative advocacy, like a lot of what we've been talking about today. So we are an office on campus with a mission really focused on inspiring and engaging students to be active in our democracy and to pursue careers in politics and public service. As was mentioned at different points, we are named after the late Senator Fred Berry, who was our senator prior to Senator Lovely. Senator Berry was born with cerebral palsy and was a disability rights advocate throughout his career, both in the legislature and also just in his time in Massachusetts. And so I'm kind of going to go through this to start to wrap up the event by sharing more about how you can engage with advocacy, a lot of what we've talked about today, but also some other options that might be better for you, whether it's about this issue or just any other issues that you're passionate about. There's a lot that goes into successfully organizing or advocating for a cause. And so we just want to give a brief overview of a few tactics that you can use when advocating for disability rights or another cause you care about. Really, the goal of me sharing this today and talking about this to wrap up this event is for you all to leave this event with one action you can take regarding this legislation or some relevant legislation that you care about. So again, you've learned so much today. Now take action with your stance about it, this or something relevant. So just to kind of get started, I always like to start with this because problems in our society can be very complex, which can make it feel really overwhelming to feel like you can do something about it. For example, disability rights includes a lot of different issues. However, when advocating for something, you want to make sure that you have a simple and specific goal in the change you are trying to make. So this event today, really kind of looking very closely about aversive therapies and this bill's simple goal of banning it is kind of a great example of taking a very complex issue that affects many of ourselves or our friends and family and thinking about a very clear, specific action of how we can make change, just one step in kind of working towards progress. And so with that, kind of an overview of some tactics. Basically, after you learn more about the cause, such as the cause that you learned today, the next step is actually figuring out what steps you're going to take, what tactics you'll use to advocate for the change you want to see. So some of these tactics that I'll talk about today, you can do on your own as an individual, but campaigns and advocacy is always more effective and impactful when you have other people involved. This doesn't mean that you have to gather a group of people all by yourself, but really just seeing what relevant organizations such as ARC are already doing and how you can participate in that advocacy and support the work they're already doing. Again, the goal is kind of to listen to these different ideas and think of one thing that you might want to do, especially with the resources that ARC may provide. So really the first one is grassroots tactics. Basically, this means that grassroots tactics are tactics that help demonstrate there is broad support for the cause. It's really demonstrating people power or support for a campaign. This can really add credibility for the cause, but also kind of brings awareness to people about the cause or the campaign. And it may lead to access and influence with certain decision makers, such as some examples is, collecting petitions, which I know Maura had sent a link to a petition in the chat earlier that ARC organizes. That helps kind of build leverage for ARC to then meet with the decision makers, saying that this many people care about this cause, that they took their time to sign a petition. It shows the people power behind an issue or a cause. Actually calling your elected official, writing letters to your elected official, submitting testimony, which has also been mentioned a few times. There's also social media, which kind of, you look at this bottom picture on the right. This is a campaign that we had done around student debt at one point on campus, where students actually wrote out how much money they owed in debt and wore it, and then took photos of themselves and posted it to social media, tagging their elected officials. So using social media as a direct call to action is a great way to, again, build awareness, but also bring this cause up to the decision makers, such as elected officials. The next tactic that I'll mention is visibility, which is basically just thinking about how to build awareness about a certain cause, campaign, or group which can lead to action. So really thinking about ways to motivate people to want to take action to support the cause, thinking about the best way to just get people's attention, make them know about an issue, really saturating a community. One thing to know is people often need to see something or hear about something 3 times before they actually see it, or before it actually starts to impact them. So some examples that you may have seen on campus or other campaigns do is posters, either throughout a campus or throughout a community. Sometimes people poster a whole wall with it, and that catches people's attention. Sending emails about the issue. Props. So as you can see in the bottom right, there's a giant sea turtle. This is an example from a campaign that an environmental organization has done in the past regarding zero waste, like plastic waste such as straws, and how that impacts wildlife or in the ocean. And so this was set up right along the coast. I think it was in California, really, and it brought people's attention, caught people's attention, and made them start talking about this initiative. They'd come up to the people that were standing there and talk to them. There's stunts, so you might see people doing standouts where they're kind of holding signs at different intersections about a certain issue. So there could be one about stop the shock, and that might catch people's attention while they're driving, and they'll look into it later to see what this is about. Sometimes signs of honk for something, so in support of something, or just wearing something very similar. Protests is another kind of visibility that's often just demonstrates a broad support of people who are willing to show up and take time from their day, either in support of something or against something, and that sends a message, very visible if it gets the attention of people nearby or the media. Again, social media, utilizing hashtags, videos, certain filters. Sometimes I know certain organizations do or influencers will do Instagram takeovers, for example, to kind of demonstrate their support or bring attention to a certain initiative that they care about. And I think one of the things that Senator Lovely talked about was also just the visibility of talking about it. Just talking about it in conversations with friends or peers or coworkers, that's a form of visibility right there, just building awareness, bringing attention to an issue that folks might not know about or haven't heard about. So these are things that you could do on your own or kind of see how you can support other organizations doing this work. But again, just bringing awareness to the issue that you're thinking of. The next tactic is actually working with the media. So I think we've talked a little bit about this today, but this can be really major in educating and influencing a wide range of people, including the public and important leaders. So actually, it can be one of the most important tools to achieve campaign victories, because again, it's one of the greatest ways to build awareness to a broad range of people. So thinking about how something can be an internal community problem that only people who have friends and family being impacted really talk about it, to then it becoming a public problem if it's making news headlines, if it's in the media, if people are reading it while they're reading their Sunday paper, checking the news in the morning when they wake up. It really takes someone's personal story and puts it on the headline where people are seeing it and empathizing with it and understanding it. And the big thing I like to mention with this is I mentioned working with the media. It indicates kind of that relationship building is often beneficial to this work. So actually building relationships with those in the media, or if you have friends or family already in the media, tapping into those connections. because it actually makes it so that those media outlets are more likely to include your submissions because they know who you are and understand what you're trying to accomplish. So I'm sure the ARC actually has relationships with a lot of media outlets, certain writers or editors who know the work that they do and make sure that when they send something to them, like whether it's a letter to the editor or a column or something, then they already know what they're doing, what they're trying to accomplish, and will prioritize publishing that to, again, educate the broader public about this. So some examples of how you can work with the media, again, some of these as individuals or with an organization, is writing a letter to the editor. So this can be really impactful, writing a letter to the editor to your actual local newspaper, because that local newspapers is actually what a lot of people look to the most versus like Boston Globe or these bigger media outlets, because people want to know what is going on right in their community. So you can reach a pretty niche audience writing to your local paper with a letter to the editor. And I think the ARC's website actually has some resources about writing a letter to the editor. Let me see if this will send in the chat. So their website there has some information about writing letters to the editor. Other options that some organizations do is writing opinion editorials, holding press conferences, like to really kind of vamp up the press about a certain issue, news coverage of events or an overall campaign, so actually inviting media to attend certain events where they can kind of learn more about the cause, see the people who are invested in this initiative. And then the last tactic I'll mention tonight is working with decision makers, which has been kind of the biggest topic of our discussion tonight in terms of advocacy, really because at the heart of all advocacy work is a person or a group of people who are the ultimate decision makers. They decide if all of your advocacy efforts are successful. And so the decision makers are different depending on what you're advocating for. For our example today, this specific legislation that we're advocating for, the decision makers are our representatives and senators, like in Salem, Senator Joan Lovely and our representative Manny Cruz. There's other examples as you're doing advocacy throughout your life, where if you're thinking about change on campus at Salem State, the decision makers might be student government or faculty or staff or administration. If you're thinking about change in your workplace, it might be your supervisor who's your decision maker that you're trying to advocate for a change. If you're thinking about a change in a company's practice, it might be the CEO of the company, such as maybe at one point there was a advocacy towards JRC to have them change their practices before it went to going through legislation and our state representatives and senators. So just keeping who that decision maker is in mind is important throughout any advocacy that you do. And again, I mentioned working with them. So kind of developing a relationship to influence them and accomplish your goal for change. So working with them is really an important part of this work. Beyond just demanding these changes, sometimes you're actually able to develop an actual relationship with your decision maker, which can make them more open to making these changes. I know Senator Lovely works really closely with Maura Sullivan, and kind of they have a really great working relationship, and that's why a lot of the work that ARC does is so like championed by Senator Lovely, because of that relationship that's been built, as well as just personal kind of investment in the initiatives and issues. Also just knowing that they will know who you are, the decision makers that you work with, and the reasoning behind your work. So you will know who they are and what they care about and how you can also help them out through your work. Sometimes change honestly may just require one meeting or simply asking your decision maker for the change. Not all advocacy needs to require protests or huge petitions. I just like to mention that because sometimes people automatically think the decision maker is like the enemy that they need to like riot against. And really sometimes it's as simple as emailing your elected official, hey, this bill is really important to me. And then it's just putting it on their radar. It wasn't something that anyone's brought up to them before. They look at it because you asked them to, and they're automatically like, yes, I'll co-sponsor that right now. They just need to be asked sometimes. And so some examples of this is, lobby meetings, so actually meeting with your elected official or whoever the decision maker may be, sharing your story, why you care about this, why it's important to you, inviting them to events. So like Senator Lovely was invited to this event tonight and saw all of you show up and care about this initiative. And so that really demonstrates to her and kind of continues to push her to do this advocacy in her role. Sending updates about your work to the decision makers, submitting testimony, asking for endorsements or co-sponsorship for certain legislation. And then just some other resources that might be helpful for you is registering to vote. So all of these elected officials in the State House were voted in by community members and residents of Massachusetts. So using vote.gov to just check that you are registered to vote or register to vote, because that really helps when you are contacting your elected official. You can find out who your elected officials are. This is just USA.gov in general in case you don't live in Massachusetts. There's also a website, masslegislature.gov, and I'll share all these in the chat after I've stopped sharing. But this, you can actually explore all the legislation that is going on in Massachusetts right now to see what else you might support, so that when you reach out to your elected official, you can just send them a list of all these things that you support and or see their stance on it, see what they're already in support of. Salem State specifically, we have an annual advocacy month that the Center for Civic Engagement hosts every March. So that will be coming up March 2024, where we usually host like 2 to 3 events a week. Honestly, it's usually over like 20 events throughout the whole month that you can get involved with to learn more about other issues, how to take action. You could join or start a student organization on campus that's doing some of this work. Or if you want to be on our email list to learn about other upcoming events related to political engagement, advocacy, community engagement, you can just shoot us an email and we will add you to that list so you get that from us throughout the year. But otherwise, just thank you for the time today. It's really exciting to kind of hear everyone's real passion about this work and also just how to take it beyond what you're learning in the classroom and start to put it into practice to advocate for something that will impact you throughout all of your careers. So thank you for giving time to me today, Jenny.
Thank you, Samantha. That was excellent. That was really great. Mara, are there particular efforts or strategies that the ARC has found really successful?
Oh, I just love that presentation. It brought in everything that we like to share when we're trying to empower advocates. And I love what you said, especially about relationship building. It really comes down to that on so many levels. But also not to forget the staff at the legislative offices. So I work with Senator Lovely's team, much more often than I work directly with the senator, and they can be incredibly influential. They go right to their bosses. So communicating with them, don't get discouraged if you end up meeting with staff, because they're really important. Yeah, there was so much. They said definitely register to vote, because if you call them, they can kind of see right away with your phone number and address if you're a registered voter, and they're going to pay more attention to you. So, and then the other thing that stuck out at me is just, really taking advantage of social media, tagging your reps and senators on posts, following them, giving back to them a little bit too. It's a little bit of give and take. Like you said, like you need them to support legislation that's important to you. Can you help them out, at a voting day, or other ways that you can support your rep and senator? So yeah, so it was great. Actually, both presentations were wonderful. So thank you.
That's great. That's excellent. And Samantha, I know that I wanted to let everyone know, everyone who registered for the event today has been put into a Canvas course. If you haven't had a chance to look at it before you came to the event tonight, go back to that site, and there's information about the bill there, all the links to the ARC and their legislation and the things that they're advocating for and how to do it through the ARC will be there. And I can put Samantha's presentation up there so you can go back and check out her great links and help you decide which effort that you would like to take, if you could leave with one effort that you would like to do. And there's also a place to kind of just introduce yourself to each other, to the other people that attended, and maybe talk to your to the other students here at the university about how you support this bill and why you support this bill. So please make sure you, if you haven't had a chance to go look at that Canvas course, that you do that afterwards. Anyone have questions for Mara or for Sam or Kathleen that they'd like to ask while we still have everyone together?
Well, I'll come in again. I don't want to be monopolizing. I wonder if it's possible. I get the sense that the, what should we say, the editor of the Boston Globe, Linda Pizzuti, Henry, would very much be in favor of this bill. And I don't know whether or not anybody's approached her, but I mean, someone at your level, Maura. I mean, it could be any one of us, but rather than the smaller editorial things, I mean, why not go right to the Globe and see if she would possibly do, you know, an editorial or allow an editorial, because this is just so important. I mean, I've learned so much in this presentation, and I really better start catching up on some of my reading, but because I really learned about ABA tonight, which, I mean, gosh, we had a faculty member whose son really benefited from it, but that doesn't mean that everyone does, certainly. But anyway, Maura, I wonder if that would be something that, and if we could help you in any way with that.
Yeah, so the Globe's been great, and they've definitely covered this bill a couple of times in the past. We haven't approached them yet, but this is sort of the time with the hearing coming up. And the way the session works, because it's a 2-year session, we really don't want we want to have as much attention at the right time as possible. So we'll be reaching out to the Globe and to other media, television stations, probably right around the time of the hearing, so that there'll be some extra pressure on the legislature to move the bill. But yeah, we have some great journalists that follow the disability community, but we would love to see it, you know, front page sometime. That would be wonderful. So any connections I'll take.
That would be great.
Mara, what do you think are the best ways for any of the students here tonight to kind of help your efforts at the ARC? What would you suggest some of their efforts be?
Yeah, I think Samantha hit on so many of them. I would say, if you don't mind doing that, the link that I put in is actually to a letter that you can customize to your rep and senator. It'll go automatically based on, you know, your address. And, you know, you can customize it to say who you are, but it says, you know, I'm writing alongside of the ARC, and I would like you to be a co-sponsor for this legislation. Now, some of your reps and senators might already be, but only 16 people lawmakers have co-sponsored this legislation. So we could really push that. So yeah, so I would say start there, and then I would say reach out and, you know, maybe set up a time to talk during district hours. I think Senator Lovely noted that she does those on Mondays. Almost every legislator will have those. And just, you know, if you really want to help, maybe work on some testimony that you can send in, either written or you can attend the hearing virtually. Testimony has to be under 3 minutes. So you just try to really put together something powerful in 3 minutes. And or you can come to the State House and experience it. And you know what else? Just coming to the State House on the day of the hearing and filling that room makes a statement too. So if you don't want to necessarily testify, but you want to be there in support, be prepared. It's a very long day. It's usually at least a 5-hour hearing. So yeah, for this bill in particular, other bills, you know, certainly don't draw this kind of a crowd. And it's a very difficult hearing to sit through because, like I said, it's, you know, you're really hearing from both sides, and it's pretty powerful in all ways. But I do think this is a really good year for us to push hard with the new administration. In the past, I mean, just FYI, there was a legislator who was the chair of Ways and Means, which is a very powerful position, and his nephew was a client of JRC. And so that was a struggle. You know, he really supported the school. He's no longer in the legislature, so we move forward. So we are feeling positive about this, and I'd say also just reach out to me. This is really my job, is to help support people who want to do more for legislation.
And you also said federally, this could be taken care of at a federal level too, as well, if there were more advocacy at that level.
You know, that's a great thing to remember. August is the time where all of our Congress comes back to district, and they're here, they're around, they're able to meet. So you can actually, you know, find a time to talk to your Congress people about this important issue. There isn't like a current bill, you know, for them to work on a federal level, but putting it on their radar as you know, an important issue to you know, we have great champions, but they need to step up on this.
Anyone else have questions or comments?
I would love to hear from students who are currently working in settings where their clients have aggressive behaviors and they're not managed by aversive therapies, and just kind of giving us some hope about what's happening out in the community that's more functional and more strengths-based.
Well, I would just have to jump in real quick to say that's all I see. You know, I see wonderful programming for our kids and adults. You know, our community still needs to advocate for enough supports throughout the lifespan, but positive behavior support is really the focus now. Like I said, we still want more choice, obviously, but I think this is really, you know, the way school systems are going, and adult services as well.
I know during COVID, you definitely experienced what the lack of options for your son. Yeah, and just that occupational deprivation during that period of time, how that changed his life and your family life, and what a difference the programming that he's involved in now has made for him.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, for my sons, having that one-to-one support for activities of daily living, for all of the skill development day to day that needs support, so that there won't be regression. When we were stuck at home and we really only had virtual support, the regression was significant for both my sons. So that hands-on support is so critical, and that bond and connection between teachers and support people that just was so hard to get over virtual.
When I've worked with people with aggressive behaviors, both adults and children, I think the things that have helped me most and my colleagues is just to remember behavior is communication. There's always a reason for whatever the behavior is. Also, are they regulated? Are their basic needs met? Because like, how often do we all get hangry. You know what I mean? It's like sometimes people are just hungry and they can't tell you, but they just need to go to the bath. I know we're all probably hungry right now, but it's just like starting there, starting with regulation, and just also kind of letting people regulate in the way they need to, like not trying to quiet someone who needs to be loud, and just like honoring what they need to do to regulate themselves was huge for me, because I've seen people like be restrained for being too loud or acting in ways deemed inappropriate, and that's just doesn't work. It's traumatizing to restrain people. So yeah, just honoring people and what they need.
Absolutely.
It looks like Colby, you have your hand up. Oops, I think you're muted.
You're muted.
There you go.
Hi,
There you
sorry.
go.
I was
That's
just
all right.
applauding Steen. I agree
Oh.
with what she had to say regarding like an unmet need, and there's like a reason to behind the behavior. So I was just giving her a round of applause.
Sorry, I thought it was a hand up. It was a Cynthia, I wonder if we could have, since the IPE, I mean, we could certainly invite other departments, but I wonder if there should be another kind of follow-up collaboration. And we could have McGuire Reserve College of Health and Human Services, Center for Civic Engagement letter writing event at the Harrington Building just before the hearing, maybe a couple of weeks before the hearing, just not even an event, but just like space for students can like see and write and be done.
No, that's a great idea. First of all, thank you, Maura, Sam, Kathleen, Jeremy. That I've learned so much. That was incredible and so important. We could definitely, we could definitely even set up a table down at the Harrington where people can come and learn. I was also going to say, if folks want, Sam offered amazing ideas. If people want additional support with doing it, one-on-one support, reach out to the Institute of Politics. I mean, we can work with you on crafting a letter or registering a vote or whatever the action you're interested in taking.
Okay.
Please feel free to reach out, and we'll touch base with you and figure out something
Great
for the fall before.
I don't want it to be a heavy lift for you guys, because I know the fall is busy for you, but even just a table that has some literature and some tools. That would be a big mailbox.
Great. And I know that the occupational therapy department has their policy courses in the fall, and that was done particularly because the National Association has their Hill Day in the fall. But it would also be nice if this hearing was particularly happening in the fall, that maybe we could get a group of students to be able to attend that hearing. I think they'd be very passionate about being able to go and at least experience what that hearing would be like. Well, speaking of meetings, people at their basic needs, I know that people are probably either hungry or a little tired at this point. And I really want to thank Mara and Cynthia and Sam and Kathleen for all they did to make this event possible for everyone tonight. It has been a great learning experience. And I really feel that coming together for events like this and learning about policies that matter to us are going to make us better professionals when we get out there and teach us more about each other. So I really appreciate everyone who came, and Mara, thank you so much for bringing all this information and the advocacy that you do every day.
Yes, thank you, Maura.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's really great to feel the excitement from all of you. And yes, please reach out and with any questions. I'd love to see people at the hearing. That would be amazing.